Hi guys, and welcome back to this common running ailment video series. This time we're going to do a very common issue that runners have, plantar fasciitis. Talk a little bit about how that is actually a misnaming of what this is. Talk about what causes it, symptoms, and how you can prevent it or treat it if you're dealing with these issues. So first off, full disclaimer, I am not a medical doctor or have any medical training. I am just a high school distance coach. I've run my whole life, so I've seen a lot of these things, experienced a lot of these things, this one in particular. So just from my experience from dealing with it myself, dealing with it with high school age runners, I've come across a couple ways that I think that you can prevent this in a lot of cases, and if you do have it, treat it so that you don't really have it disrupt your training as much as possible. So full disclosure, not a medical doctor or anything close to it in terms of my training, just have some experience with these things and what we've dealt with. So to get started with this, plantar fasciitis is going to be a very sharp pain in this area. This is the, as you can see, is named the plantar fascia. Fascia is sort of a tendon-like sheath that runs along the length that connects various parts of the body. So as you can see, it kind of connects this part of the foot, where very base of your toe, to the heel bone right in here. So it can happen anywhere in along this plantar fascia, and you can actually feel it in your foot if you actually sort of have your toes pointed up, and you can feel it sort of sticking out the bottom part of the sole of your foot. You'll see where the red part is right here and these arrows are pointing. This is where the pain is more common. The reason being is the plantar fascia is widest where it connects with the base of your toes, and it's smallest where it connects with your heel, just because of the natural shape of your foot, how it narrows as you get more toward the heel. So this is where you're going to have a little bit more of a potential for weakening, just because it's a smaller area of this plantar fascia. But you could have it anywhere in here. When I get it, it's typically right in around here, more on, I think it's actually a little bit more common to be slightly closer to the arch side of the bottom of your foot and toward the heel. So the opposite side of what you're seeing right here, because this is the outside of the foot. But it can be the whole base of the heel. It can be right in the center. You can sometimes have it experienced there. You can even have it all the way up here at the base. So it's just anywhere in that area that you can feel on the bottom of your foot, this plantar fascia. So what would typically happen is, as this has progressed, if you, like the first step when you get out of bed, if you feel that sharp pain on that first step getting out of bed, that can be indicative of plantar fasciitis. But as you kind of move around, it sort of gets a little bit better. Also, when you're going out for a run, those first couple steps, if they hurt really bad, but it kind of goes away and loosens up in that very sharp pain, not a bruising pain at all, a very sharp sort of pain, like something's kind of jabbing into that part of your foot. Or in addition to those two times when it hurts, right at the end of a run. If after you've done the pounding and you're just kind of walking around and then it kind of starts to come back to the point where you kind of want to take your shoes off almost immediately, those three things are kind of indicative of this issue here, plantar fasciitis, and we'll explain why that is when we get a little bit into the causes here, which we're going to talk about right now. So essentially the causes are, as you can see, your foot is multiple bones. This part of it is fused together. This part can flex with your toes, but these bones, multiple bones, are fused together, and giving it some rigidity and the ability to kind of like move around is partially this plantar fascia, along with other things going on, muscles and other tendons and things like that in your foot. So what happens is the plantar fascia, and if you want to think about it as, you can almost, if you think about it, you're going out there, you're running, and this part, this arch of your foot, just very, very slightly flattens out, just a little bit, just from all the contacts. If you think that you've got way more than 1,000 steps if you run a mile, there's just that many contacts if you're going out and you're running a long run, recovery run, or whatever, and that's not even counting for just your locomotion of walking around each day. So that just flattens out just a little bit, and as the arch flattens out just a little bit, this would obviously then be stretched as this part kind of goes from this arch shape to just slightly less arch shaped. This is going to be stretched to account for that slight flattening of the arch. What that causes is a stretching, which is what it starts with, and then potentially little micro tears in this area. Now, it can get to the point where a plantar fascia can completely tear. It's not the longest term injury. Obviously depending on what you have, but it's not something that would keep you out for a year or something like that. Typically, it's more of a minor injury if this were to tear all the way. But what typically will happen is it won't happen. It's a pretty strong this fascia is a pretty strong part of your body, so it'll just kind of like stretch a little bit, Stretching causes this pain, and then these little micro tears will cause even more pain. So what you would think about basically is happening, the reason why it hurts really badly when you would first wake up in the morning is your feet aren't being stretched at all. They're just kind of sitting there as you're sleeping, and then you get up. It's gone from this more relaxed position to a complete stretch after being in a relaxed position, and that's why you get that sudden pain. Same thing if you're just kind of moving around the day, it's kind of adjusted, but then you start running, and now you're putting multiple times your body weight on your foot with every step, which running is, several times your body weight with each step. As you push off the ground and land on the ground, you're going to get a little bit more stretching, and that's what happens. And then basically, as you stop, it's just because you've caused some more micro tears or micro traumas in this area. So that's why you would feel the pain in those 3 times, and let you know that this might be something that's a little bit more, I don't want to call this minor, because it's a pretty painful thing and it can last for a decent amount of time. But it can feel like it's a really, really bad injury when typically it's something that you can manage with some easy things to actually make this be alleviated. So this is actually named incorrectly fasciitis, and we talked about this term, this itis, at the end when we did our patella tendonitis or runner's knee video. If you didn't see that video, it's in the description down below. Itis means inflammation of something. In this case, it's inflammation of the fascia, the plantar fascia, this area here. We talked about with runner's knee, patella tendonitis. The patella tendon has inflammation, so that's why it's patella tendonitis. The thing about this is when it was first kind of talked about and treated and things like that, it was thought that it was inflammation that caused this, but it's not. It's those little micro tears, micro traumas, the stretching. There's really actually little to no inflammation in this area, which actually makes the treatment of this different. With runner's knee, you're going to want to ice it. We'll talk about how this is not something you would want to ice at all, but really this should be called something completely different, not fasciitis, because there's almost no inflammation in here, which means also treating it with things like anti-inflammatories. While it can make the pain go away, it's not going to get inflammation out because there's no inflammation in there. Now, it is more common in newer runners, somebody who's just getting started, or somebody who's increasing their volume, and we'll talk about that here in the preventative. But somebody who's very new to running, especially if they're not wearing great shoes or anything like that, their body hasn't really adjusted to any of this, that's where you're going to see this much more common. Or somebody as they're ramping up for their season. I mean, I still get this every once in a while as we go from our transition in between seasons to building volume in a general preparation or just aerobic buildup phase. That's when you would feel this kind of start to set in a little bit more often. Preventative things you would want to do for this: make sure your shoes are good running shoes. If you don't know what a good running shoe is, go to a place that has people that help you try them on and things like that. Once you know what a good running shoe is, those places that have those people are more expensive to go to, but once you know, you can order them online or something like that. But know what a good running shoe is. Keep your shoes in good condition. About every 400 to 500 miles you need to change them. So if you're somebody who is running 50 miles a week, you're going to need to change your shoes 2 and 3 times a year to prevent something like this from happening. And it's a pretty important thing. We're not dealing with a lot of equipment with running. Shoes are one of the things you really do have to keep up on to make sure that things like this don't happen. So good running shoes can help prevent this from happening. Not increasing your volume too much. In the runner's knee patella tendonitis video, we talked about once you get to a point where you're running about 20 to 30 miles a week, you really don't want to increase your volume. Actually, more like 30 miles a week. 20 is too little for this, but 30 miles a week, you don't really want to increase it any more than about 20% from the week before. That way your body can adapt to things. You just want to sort of... Aerobic training is a long-term process. If you're trying to get results in aerobic training in 2 weeks, you don't have enough time for that. It's a slow process, it's a slow grind, so you're going to want to slowly increase it so your body can adapt. So just like with anything else, you want to introduce yourself to it a little bit slowly. Do not go from 30 miles a week to 50 miles a week the very next week, unless there's some reason that you did that. Maybe you had to take a week off because you were sick or something. But I'm talking about as you're building your volume for the season or whatever, Don't go from 0 to 100 too quickly. That's just good practice with almost anything you're doing to slowly introduce. So good shoes, don't increase your volume too much, about 10%. And then something else that seems to help this a little bit is varying the surface that you're running on. If you are running only on asphalt, this can set in. If you're running only on gravel, this can set in. It seems like even running only on grass can make this set in. You kind of want to vary things up. Maybe it's just from the different types of contacts, the way that you're stimulating things like blood flow in this area of the body and things like that. Varying the surface seems to help a little bit. Now, we talked about this. If this does set in, this is a pretty well supplied part of the body in terms of blood, which means it brings in oxygen, takes away waste products. It can heal fairly quickly. When I say fairly quickly, if you've got it, it can go away in a couple weeks if you're doing some of these things that are really, really if it hasn't set in too much, if you're doing some of these things that can help treat it, it can show progress pretty quickly and go away fairly quickly, considering we're dealing with fascia here, which is almost like a tendon or a ligament, essentially. If you do have this, my recommendation would be to get inserts, but not for your running shoes. I have inserts that I use just in my walk-around shoes, the ones that I wear when I'm teaching, when I'm just going to the store, when I'm doing whatever. I would never want to wear them when I'm running, though. When you get these inserts, you're going to almost feel like you're walking on a golf ball for a little bit. It takes a little bit of time to get used to it, and I would just find it really, really, really uncomfortable to run in them. I know some people that do run in them, but there's actually some studies that would find that if you have, and basically what an insert does is it pushes up on this part of the foot so that stretching of the arch doesn't happen as much. So basically you get something in here, you've got your shoe, this is a flat foot on the ground, it's an arch that basically keeps that plantar fascia a little bit more in its arched position to prevent this from stretching from happening. There is some research, though, actually a decent amount of research, that shows running in this, as your foot is contacting, it causes improper preparation, muscle preparation, tendon preparation. Your body isn't prepared to hit the ground the way that it normally would if you were running without this, or, preferably, we were designed to run barefoot, but that's the idea behind this, is if you have that arched support in there when you're doing your long run or whatever it is you're doing, your body doesn't hit the ground correctly, and there can be actually an increased risk of other types of injuries, and even to the plantar fascia itself, it can cause a little bit worse. So my suggestion is, if you have this, go get some inserts. As you're walking around, your normal daily activities, have those, but when you put your trainers on, don't have them in your trainers themselves. It can just cause a lot more issues to have them in there. Something else that's really good is to roll this out. If you've got a lacrosse ball, softball, tennis ball, something like that, to just kind of go to town in the area where it's hurting, just kind of rubbing in that area to kind of get in there. What that's going to do is, one, it's going to put the plantar fascia back in its more arched position, but more importantly, it's going to increase blood flow. We talked about the idea that blood flow brings in nutrients, brings away waste product. It helps with healing, and that's what that's going to do. Another way that you can increase blood flow and really just make it feel a lot better is to stretch out your foot in both ways. So if you were standing there, to basically, we talked about the way you find your plantar fascia by pulling your toe up, you can feel that plantar fascia, just kind of continuing with that, pulling your toe back so that you're stretching that area really nicely for maybe 10 to 30 seconds. And then you kind of go the other way, where it's almost like you're making a fist with your foot, if you want to imagine it like that, going in that other direction and kind of going back and forth between those two stretches, maybe 3 times, 4 times, holding it for 10 to 30 seconds, a couple times a day. That'll help increase blood flow also. Hot water with Epsom salt. Just hot water will increase blood flow. Epsom salt kind of helps with any types of aches and pains if you're having an issue with this. When I have to go to the Epsom salts and that kind of thing, I know that it's kind of, I've let it get a little bit out of hand, and I know I really have to do a better job of the rolling and the stretching. That's if it's a little bit more so set in, a little bit more painful. One important thing: do not ice this. Okay, again, I am not a medical doctor. I just know that when you ice this, it temporarily feels a lot better, but it makes it a whole lot worse in the long-term process. If this was inflammation, you would ice it. So runner's knee, one of the treatments is to ice it. Icing helps get inflammation out, not really from the cold, but actually it's from the increased blood flow afterwards, moving inflammation out. We talked about earlier, this is not caused by inflammation. Okay, it's caused by a stretching and then micro tears of this plantar fascia. So if you take this area that's already being stretched and is kind of being stretched to its limit, and it's being little fraying and tearing, you make that colder. Think about what would happen if you make something colder. It constricts. So now you're making this plantar fascia that's being stretched, but then constricting it also. You're causing potentially more little micro tears. Once it's come back, it's more stretching, that kind of thing. You do not want to ice this. There's old methods of treating this by rolling out with a frozen water bottle. Do not do that. It will feel better in the short term, but it'll make it last a whole lot longer. So you want to do those other things. Getting those inserts for your walk-around shoes, but not while you're running. Rolling it out and the stretching, those are the best things for it. Obviously, if this is something that lingers for a long time or becomes unbearable, go see a doctor because it may be something else. Plantar fasciitis, though, is one of those things that you typically can treat quite a bit. I usually, I've got a team of about 20 people, usually maybe 2 to 3 of those each year might have some level of this. That might even be too much. Maybe 1 or 2 each year might have some level of this, from mild to somewhat more aggressive. And it's almost always people who are increasing their volume. Maybe somebody who goes from a middle distance group to more of a distance group, or your newer kids that are just sort of dealing with newer adaptation. So make sure that you're keeping your shoes really good, changing them out as need be, not increasing your volume too much, and varying up the surfaces if you can. This really shouldn't be something that puts you on the shelf for too long. So if you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing. If you found this helpful, maybe think about sharing it around. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comment down below. As I mentioned in the description down below, I have a video on runner's knee, but also on side stitches, 2 other very common ailments for distance runners that you may want to check out also if you're dealing with any of those issues or just want to stay on top of them. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.